Mr. Bukovsky, from what you've been able to learn about the trials of Mr. Sharansky and Ginzburg in the Soviet Union, what is your opinion?
Well, I'm sure that these trials would be a repetition of usual shows, political shows, Soviet government start to do for the last 20 years, with a closed door of courtroom where public is not permitted, and friends and relatives of the accused people are not permitted into, with the defense deprived of any rights to defend really their clients, and with the terms, with the sentences are preconcerted beforehand by the party decision. And I have little doubt that both Ginzburg and Sharansky would receive maximum of the possible term under these articles.
Death for Sharansky?
Well, I couldn't rule out such possibility for Sharansky, but I would rather suppose he would get 15 years of imprisonment and 10 years for Ginzburg.
Do you think justice is being done here?
Well, what are you speaking about? What kind of justice? It's so-called party communist justice, which is decided before us and without any trials.
Does it remind you of anything in Soviet history?
Yeah, it reminds me of my own trials, in the first place. And speaking about Sharansky case, it reminds me of two things. First thing, the Leningrad trial of hijackers in 1970, and as early as 30s, where they had a so-called show process against so-called enemies of the people. It reminds me very much of it, especially with Sharansky case, which I think would be used against the Jews very broadly in Soviet Union. As you remember, in the 50s, in the early 50s, under Stalin, they had so-called doctor's plot, which was used broadly against Jews afterwards, to such an extent that Jews were prepared to be exiled to Siberia, all of them.
Would you state very basically your objections to these trials?
Yes, of course. Well, I first place, knowing the Soviet legislation, I know it is absolutely lawless trials, without people's rights, without any possibilities for the defendants to defend themselves, without real judges, because all the judges are members of the Communist Party, and only 3 of them are permitted in Soviet legislation. It is not the panel of jury as you have in the United States or in England. It is just officials, party officials, who condemn you according to their, injunctions. That's all.
Is it a show trial?
Yes, of course it is a show trial. They would have, I think, a coverage in Soviet papers distorting everything the defendant did or told or behaved. And they would use this trial to make a propaganda against dissidents, against Jews. They would try to present them as traitors, as, dirty people, and so on.
Do you think the Soviet authorities are trying to crush the human rights movement?
Oh, yes, they're trying to do it from the very beginning of it. And they weren't successful so far. What they're trying to do right now, after adopting at the end of the last year, special decree, party decree of the Central Committee to eliminate the dissident activity inside of the country and outside of it, they are, in fact, start a mass campaign everywhere against us with a mass imprisonment and mass harassment of the people.
The authorities argue that this is an internal matter being decided by Soviet law, by the Soviet legal system. What do you say to that?
Well, I cannot say so, first thing, because under the Helsinki Accord, the human rights situation was linked to international peace, cooperation, and the possibility of to live together. In other words, 35 countries of the world understood that the human rights is not purely internal situation, and it has its influence upon the peace and stability in the world. Second thing, we have no border between internal situation in terms of oppression of the people and external aggression. I'm sure that such things as intrusion and occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1968 or Hungary in 1956, it is the same line as they have in Soviet Union when dealing with dissidents. In other terms, whenever in one country we have an oppression of dissent, we have to be prepared for external aggressions of real danger for the peace in the world.
Do you think that President Carter and the United States government are taking the correct position in regards to the trials and the SALT talks tomorrow?
I don't think so. I would say that their willingness to start the SALT negotiations exactly at the time of these trials in Moscow is a bad mistake, and they would pay for it, because in this way they manage to enforce upon Soviets managed to enforce upon Americans their own standpoint, their own understanding of situation. And mind you, American delegation would find in SALT negotiations more hard line from Soviet side than they could expect otherwise.
Why?
Because Americans are underdogs right now. They agreed. They were pushed to accept this humiliating situation.
Why is it humiliating?
It is humiliating because in this way, Soviet side, let us say, underlined its own right to oppress and to execute people for the activity, agreed in a Helsinki agreement, by the way, in an international agreement. In other words, not having a strength, not having a guts to force Soviets to fulfill their obligation under Helsinki Accord, Americans cannot expect Soviets to be tractable in SALT negotiations or any other new negotiations and treaties.
So you're suggesting, if I understand correctly, that the United States will suffer as a result of not postponing the SALT talks?
Yes, it will suffer drastically in the negotiations itself and after it. My suggestion is just to postpone such negotiations until the trials are over, to see the results of them.
One analyst suggested that it seems that the foreign ministry in the Soviet Union has lost control of diplomatic events and that perhaps the state police, the KGB, has more power than ever before. Would you agree with that analysis?
Oh, yes, of course. I would say it more precisely. The Central Committee and the party headquarters are in command of foreign policy long ago. And it started to be like it since, I say, the end of 60s, after Czechoslovakian events. And it grows and grows every day.
Mr. Bukovsky, thank you very much.
Thank you.